We do not want anyone to feel pity for us. We have enough pity. And those families, they don't need pity. They need people to invest and recognize that they're made in the image of God just like you and I are. And they have a story. We have a story.
Hey guys, today's guest grew up poor, but he would argue he was not raised in poverty. What is the difference? Let's get into the episode and find out. Welcome to Me and Poverty, a podcast about breaking barriers, building bridges, and changing lives, one story at a time. Today's guest is somebody very special to me. He is a true Appalachian. He's going to talk about that today. On this channel, we emphasize faith quite a bit. Today's guest, he knows a thing or two about faith. He has been a pastor, and he, just a few years ago, actually stepped away from being a pastor to now he is an executive director for one of the most impactful nonprofits in Appalachia. So, without further ado, I want to introduce my dear friend, Dwayne Mills. Dwayne, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thanks, Joe. It's great to be with you guys.
So, let's talk a little bit first. You just came out of basketball season, man. I know you're a household that's all about basketball. I know that for a couple of different reasons. One, our audience should know I actually got to coach your daughter. Good times. I definitely miss coaching. Look forward to getting back to it, hopefully soon. But tell me, how did basketball season go this year? How'd your boy do?
Eli, who's our third son, we have three sons and one daughter. Eli is a junior at Martin County High School, and this year was the first man off the bench. Like last year, we were one game away from going to the state tournament at Rupp Arena, so it was another heartbreak game for us, the last game, but overall it was a great season. Eli did really well this year. He was in the top 10 in Region 15 in three-point percentage shooting. And actually, a few of our local folks give him a nickname. One is the Blonde Bomber because of his blonde hair.
The Blonde Bomber.
The Blonde Bomber. The next one is Deadeye Eli, since his name's Elijah. Of course, he goes by Eli. So it's been a fun year, and we're looking forward to it. He's taking a break a little bit from basketball. He's still going out and shooting a couple times a week, but he's doing a little baseball for Martin County High School right now, and then summer ball will hit, and then they'll be back in school again in the fall for his senior year. So we're excited about that and what that looks like, especially for his last year in high school.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that he is that old. Now I know you've got older, but it's the journey, right? I've got a 4-year-old now. The time just flies by. And he's in T-ball. Pray for me, man. Like my inner coach, I can't take the herding cats aspect of T-ball. Like he's chasing a butterfly and I'm like gripping. I'm like a lost person sitting in the back of the church holding on to that pew. Like it's hard for me to watch, man. So you pray for me. Let's talk a little bit about Turkey Creek. So you and I both from Martin County. That's Martin County, Kentucky for our audience. There's a wonderful holler of Turkey Creek. Can you tell our audience a little bit about your early upbringing in Martin County and what it was like growing up on Turkey Creek, and maybe why did you end up leaving Martin County and maybe Appalachia as a whole for a while?
Turkey Creek's always been home for me. Was raised there up until I was 9 years old. But while we lived there, it was the mid to late 70s, early 80s. That's when Martin County had, I think it was 8 or 9 elementary schools in the county during those days. And so really the church there, Turkey Creek Church of the Nazarene, was a church that my grandfather had founded with a couple of other folks, 2 of them being my great-grandmothers, in 1950. And so my dad was one of 11 kids. My grandfather and granny, of course, were raised pretty much on Turkey Creek, during their lives. And so anyways, when my mom and dad met in Ohio at a camp meeting, and then they got married in 1970, Dad was called to the church that my grandfather had founded, Turkey Creek Nazarene. And so I was their son. So I was a part of that family, lived here for 9 years, very formative years years for me. And of course, that's when in these communities in Martin County, the elementary school was really the hub of the community. And so many kids along the creek, as we call them creekers, for Turkey Creek. And so we grew up there, still have a lot of wonderful memories. Just memory after memory after memory. One of the things I tell folks when I talk about Turkey Creek is a couple of my elementary school teachers were also my Sunday school teacher at the church, so they had me, bless their hearts, 6 days a week, because I was a pretty rambunctious and ornery kid growing up. So they tell me anyways, and I do remember some of those times as well. But a lot of great memories there. It really was community, raising kids and your parents and all of that. One of the funny stories, back in those days, there was corporal punishment in the schools, and so if you didn't behave in the school, you got a SWAT. And when my teachers found out if I got a SWAT at the school, my sister, who was 10 months and 3 years older than me, would go home and tell my parents. Then I would get spanked at school. So my teachers stopped spanking me at school because they didn't want me to get spanked at home. But just some wonderful memories. I cherish them every day of my life. So thankful for all of the folks who were followers of Jesus, who are part of our faith community at Turkey Creek Nazarene. Because in those days, Turkey Creek Nazarene was really a one-room church. They had a basement underneath, but back in '83, before we moved away, because my dad, being a pastor, felt a call to go to another church. That's the reason we moved away from Turkey Creek. But was averaging close to 300 in that little church back in 1983. It was very active church in the community in a lot of ways, and so just have some wonderful memories when back in the mid to late 70s, early 80s.
We've been friends for quite a while, and I never knew why you all moved away. So. Yeah. This has been eye-opening for me.
Yep.
What is your relationship with poverty?
When we were growing up, I say we were poor. I think being poor and living in poverty are really two different things for me. Poverty is not just about being poor, but it's poverty of relationships, experiences, connection, all those things. And we were pretty poor. When Dad was pastoring the church, he was what they call bivocational. Some churches now call it co-vocational. And so he worked in construction, so he had to do that for livelihood. He was the first full-time pastor ever, if I remember right, at Turkey Creek. Back in 1976, I believe, is when that started. But I remember growing up, Mom and Dad, they were on WIC, so you had the commodity cheese and peanut butter and all of that stuff growing up. We had a garden out of necessity. If we didn't have a garden in the summer, we really didn't eat well in the winter. I tell people all the time, to this very day, I still hate green beans. I hate picking them, stringing them, breaking them, all of that, because whatever we had to eat. We were poor growing up, but we never really knew that growing up, because in those days we didn't have a television. We always played in the mountains, had a great time, played up and down the creek, played with neighbors, children everywhere over on Turkey Creek. And so now that I'm older and I look back, I can see that. But the great thing about my upbringing is I had two parents that loved Jesus and pointed me to Jesus, and that's really what made a difference. And my father would tell you to this very day, he was one of 11 children, the only one that got a college degree, felt called into ministry after he came out of the Air Force. But he would tell you it was the church, because there's been people, because not only was he a pastor, but in the Church of the Nazarene we have districts, and so you can be elected as a district superintendent. And so at 40 years old, he was elected the district superintendent of Eastern Kentucky District, which he oversaw about 60 churches in Eastern Kentucky, went back into the pastor, and then was elected again in Southwest Indiana as a district superintendent, and probably about 80 churches over there in that area. And so people would say, you grew up in Appalachia. And this is, I don't want this to come across as sounding bad, because I don't think it is, but people would ask who aren't familiar with Appalachia, how did you get out? Because those who have come in and been here for a few days, they could see how that would be difficult, someone who was raised in Appalachia. And Dad's testimony is simply, it was the church. It was the church that exposed me to things outside of what I knew with my community. And not that that was bad, but, most people know Martin County was the place in 1964 where President Johnson came and declared the war on poverty on the Tom Fletcher front porch. Very, very impoverished community. I've heard my father talk about how he was 17 years old and can remember his motorcade, President Johnson's motorcade, because they landed the helicopter in Hardin Bottom, what's known as Hardin Bottom now, and the motorcade went right through town and up to the Tom Fletcher home up Route 3. And Dad talks about how he stood on the street in Inez and watched that motorcade go, which is kind of a neat story to hear them talk about. And thinking about poverty, I look back on it and I say all the time, we were poor, but we didn't really live in poverty, how I would define poverty today.
I think that's fair. And we can talk more about the difference and the different types of poverty depending how this goes. I'm someone that spent some time in higher ed. You did as well. What was your role in higher ed? What did you and your wife do?
Sure. We were at Olivet Nazarene University. So Bethany and I, my wife and I, met at Mount Vernon Nazarene College at the time. It's now a university in Mount Vernon, Ohio. And we got married while we were still in college. And then I did ministry in Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. My wife went on, she got her bachelor's in psychology, went on to get a master's of education in psychology at IU, Indiana University, and then on to get her doctorate in clinical psychology at Spalding University in Louisville. But through that process, when we were living in southern Indiana, we had the opportunity for her to go and be the director of counseling either at Mount Vernon Nazarene University, which we thought maybe God was moving us there because that was our alma mater, and at the same time Olivet Nazarene University. And we felt like through a lot of that experience that God was calling us to Olivet. And so I had the opportunity after we moved there after a year or two to accept the position as Dean of Students at Olivet. And Olivet is our largest Nazarene university. There's 8 of them in USA, Canada, and it's a Christian liberal arts university. We had about 2,700 residential students at the time that I was the Dean of Students, overseeing res life and judicial affairs was the big part of what I did. And then Bethany was the Director of Counseling and Health Services. Also, she taught psychology as well at the university. And I never thought a boy being raised in Turkey Creek in Martin County would ever be at a place just a little bit south of Chicago, leading a team of about 20 resident directors and 75 RAs and overseeing peer judicial council review boards and all of that. But God really blessed us, blessed my life and with the experiences that I've had. And so that's how I landed in that, was just, again, through the church. Connection to the church. The church is so important in my life, of course, and now it's generational because of the decision my grandfather made many years ago to ask Jesus into his heart. And because of that decision, I tell people all the time as I travel the country, one decision can change the course of generations to come. Just one decision. And I'm thankful for that experience. And if God hadn't radically called us to Martin County 13 years ago, I probably still would be in higher ed today, I would assume.
I'm curious, how did you end up being the 2023 champion of Appalachia?
It was a God thing. From what I understand, they go through a nominating process, and CAP, Christian Appalachian Project, that gives that award out every year in the fall of every year. They do an internal, what they call Champion of Appalachia, which are partners they have, donors they have, stakeholders they have. And then they give a Champion of Appalachia to someone kind of outside of the organization. So they do a nominating process, and since I was selected in the fall of 23, actually served the last 2 years on the nominating committee for the external Champion of Appalachia. And I think a lot of it was from the work that we did in Perry County when the floods hit in July of 22. A lot of the work that we do, it's kind of by default. One of our key core tenets at Appalachia Reach Out is to do community engagement and leadership development. And so by default, with the natural disasters that hit Appalachia from time to time, it's what we do. And so we responded to those devastating floods. I think there was about 11 counties in eastern Kentucky in July of 22 that were declared natural disasters. Martin County was a part of that, but we were just a small part of that. We weren't hit near like how Perry County was hit. And, 12 and a half inches in 3 hours, devastating. Creeks that were usually 2 and 3 feet deep rose to 53 feet, took out everything in its path. And so we responded, and still there in a small role in Perry County. But I think through that work, and probably some of the other work that we do through Appalachia Reach Out, folks, I guess, have recognized that and nominated me, from what I understand, and that's how it happened. So
I think it is well deserved.
Well, I appreciate it.
I lived on campus, Alslead's campus, when the flood came through and devastated everything surrounding that campus. So I know the work that you did then and recently in Martin County as well. So needed, so needed. Can you tell our audience a little bit more about ARO?
Sure. Well, Appalachia Reach Out was founded in 1972, a lady by the name of Miss Jo Boomsma, who was an educator in Western Michigan in the late 50s and 60s. In the summer, when she was not teaching school, would come to Martin County, and we're really not sure how she chose Martin County because she started coming before President Johnson was here in 64. I originally thought maybe that was the reason why, but she was coming before 64. She would come in the summers and work with the school district on finding out which students needed support, academic support, tutoring, reading support. And she would do that work. She would come in her 4x4 Bronco, and she'd go in and out of the hollers in the summer and work with those students, and then go back to Western Michigan during the school year and teach. But it was in 1972 that God radically called her to pack up everything that she had. She was never married, highly educated, wonderful Christian woman, and felt like God was calling her to give the rest of her life to the work of Appalachia. And so she moved to Martin County. I tell people as I travel and tell our story a little bit that if you can imagine a woman in 1972 who was not married, who was highly educated, uprooting her life and moving to a place like Martin County, it would be probably the equivalent of us being called to a third world country to serve.
Sure.
That's the way that I can kind of parallel that a little bit, I think. And so it was started in 1972, and from that time we just celebrate 53 years this year of the work that we do. And so in the last 6 years, since I stepped into the role as executive director, because I'd already been here a few years working and pastoring at Turkey Creek Church of the Nazarene, and our call to come back was about serving our people. Even though many of the people we served would never darken the doors of our church, we were still called to those folks. It really helped us fine-tune what I felt like God was calling us to do as far as our mission. And so we do a lot in education. I do a lot with addiction recovery, of course, community engagement, leadership development. And the fourth piece is bringing in short-term mission teams that we call Work and Witness that we bring in throughout the year. And so that's a little bit of what we do. Our mission is simply to be Christ's love in action, and we do that by being the hands, the feet, and the heart and the mission of Jesus.
Being the executive director of ARO, what would you say are your main roles, duties, responsibilities? And maybe ARO is not like many other organizations. So how would you say that your role as an executive director differs maybe from a traditional one?
To answer the question about probably my main role, one is operations. So I oversee operations of the ministry. There's a lot of moving pieces to the ministry itself. Don't have time to go into all the details, but beyond the four core tenets that I mentioned just a few moments ago, we also have a thrift store on our campus that generates about 30 to 40% of our ministry revenue. It's open 5 days a week. Employ a couple of local folks. Our two store employees that we have there, one has served for over 30 years and the other for over 17 years. So it's pretty neat, over 50 years between both of them. It also creates a community aspect of people just coming in and doing life together.
For sure.
We also have a food pantry right now. We're serving about 160 to 200 families a month through that work, beyond the other work that we do. Overseeing the operations, we've grown by our staff over the last 6 years. We've also added a couple other locations in Appalachia. And then I always tell people my main role is traveling the country, telling the story, connecting with stakeholders, and really raising funds. As a Christian nonprofit, beyond just our thrift store that we have that generates revenue for our ministry, it's pretty much fundraising and contributions. We are now receiving some grants, private grants, foundation grants, and so we're doing some of that work now. But we've been able to expand that over the last 6 years, and so that's probably some of my main role right now.
I've seen the amount of traveling that you do, and I'm sure you don't even post about all of them, right? But my goodness, you cover a lot of ground, my friend.
Very blessed. I mean, it's an honor. And the great thing about being able to travel and share the story is it opens doors to other opportunities as well. And so it's been pretty neat on a national level. God's opened the door for us to be at the table on a national level, representing rural America, how to address issues of rural poverty. There's a lot of emphasis within the church with the capital C on urban ministry, but very rarely do you hear a whole lot on rural ministry and how to best effectively do that kind of work. And so because of God blessing our work, it's opened the door for us to be at some tables on a national level to speak into. And I tell people all the time when they call me and say, hey, will you come and do a workshop? Will you do, whatever? And I just tell them, I don't consider myself an expert. I can come and speak about what we're doing and how God's blessing it. And so it's a true honor to be able to represent, first of all, our people. Well, first of all, the Lord and all of that, because all glory goes to Him. But then our people, because I love our people. I've told many that are around here that I can't think of anything I'd rather be doing than what I'm doing currently. And God's blessed me with other opportunities for ministry before getting here and even since I've been here. But it's very easy to, when people call and say, hey, we would love for you to come interview or do that, it's very easy to be able to say, no, I'm honored by that. but I feel
Sure.
like I'm exactly where God would have me right now.
There's a wonderful peace and understanding and comfort that comes even when you're in a stressful role as an
Yep.
executive director, I'm sure.
Yep.
Just
Exactly.
knowing you're in the center of his
Yep.
will.
Yep. There's, it was a couple of weeks ago, I got a call from a church in Ohio asking me if I would come and do a specific role. And this person came down on the pastor came down on his sabbatical to this past summer to see what we were doing. And he said, I'm just calling you to see if you'd even consider it. And I said, well, I appreciate the call. I'm always humbled by it. I said, however, I told somebody the other day that the call that brought us here would have to be the same kind of call that would take us away from here. And he said, well, I told my wife there's only one way that Mills is leaving Martin County, and that's feet first, probably. and I love what God's called us to do. It is hard work. It's very difficult work. But God's blessing us. We're seeing a lot of lives change through what God is doing. And so just to be a small part of that is just very humbling.
First, let me say, I adore your wife. She's fantastic, and she's very spirited when it comes to basketball too, just like you, my friend. Which is that's why we get along so well. What advice would you have for maybe a couple that want to get into ministry? They're not sure where to start. What would you advise them?
Yeah, I think the first, it's a pretty simplistic answer, to be honest with you, Joe, but it's just really being sensitive to the voice of God and what that sounds like. Not so much him speaking, but knowing how he's speaking and affirming that through the process of prayer and reading scripture and conversation of people that you have a lot of confidence in, spiritually speaking, or mentors that you have. And one of the questions I've been asking, the Lord laid this question on my heart probably 2 or 3 years ago. It's a question as I travel the country, I ask where I go to speak. And that question is this: are you willing to put your yes on the table and allow God to ask the question? Which really is a life of surrender, is what that is. And that really, I think God, I think in word pictures, so having that table sitting there and me placing my yes on the table is important for me to see that in my mind. Because I am a type A OCD person, so I like to have everything planned out. I like to have the legal pads and everything marked off my to-do list every day. And one of my life verses is Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5 and 6, where in part of that verse it says, and lean not on your own understanding. And so that piece of it, God really challenges me in a lot of ways. And there's times still, even in these days in which I live, and the question is your yes on the table? Because if our yes is on the table and the Holy Spirit speaks, then we're ready to respond because we've already placed that yes on the table. And so that's what I would tell couples. I know it's simplistic, but I would just simply say for you to be completely obedient to the Lord, you have to be surrendered first. Because I'm a true believer in this as well. You cannot obey God unless you fully trust Him. So trust always precedes obedience. I cannot fully obey if I don't fully trust. And so that passage also talks about to trust in the Lord with all your heart. And so when I'm speaking sometimes, I'll quote that verse and I'll say, and trust in the Lord with most of your heart. And people are like, no, that's not what. But I say, sometimes we live that way though. It's not most of your heart. It's all of your heart. It's every aspect of your heart. And so if people are living in that way, if individuals and then married couples and families are living that way, and you're allowing God to use you in ways that you never thought were possible, it's simply because you've surrendered yourself to His will in your life. And so that's kind of what I would encourage. And from time to time, we get the opportunity to, Bethany and I both, to counsel couples, and we do premarital counseling and all of that. And those are some of the things that we talk about.
I had a friend the other day, actually on the show, and he talked about how the flesh, if you will, loves to fixate and control. But he made a statement that has really stuck with me, and I actually made a short of it and put it on the channel. He said, I'll try to fixate and control, but then that takes the faith out of it. And I'm like,
Yep.
It's like you said, it's easy to understand, like, yeah, but we do as human beings. Mm-hmm. I think we forget sometimes that we are supposed to be that spiritual being, just kind of dragging around the body instead of the opposite.
Yeah.
I alluded to earlier, you've had a house full of ball players, man. Do you still get joy out of watching it, or is it just all stress nowadays?
No, I enjoy it, man. We do have we have two sons that are somewhat out of the home. Our oldest son is now teaching high school math up in Bourbonnais, Illinois. He graduated from Olivet Nazarene University a couple years ago, and he's getting ready to get married in May. And then Evan, our son that just graduated last year, is a freshman at Mount Vernon Nazarene University and in pastoral ministry. And so we recognize those days, there's less days ahead of us now than there are the behind us. And so so we're taking that in. You know, Emily's playing soccer right now, and she's a 7th grader, so we still have a few years ahead of us. But, you know, looking at Eli and being like, you know, next year's it. I get nervous for them because you want them to do their best. I'm one of those people that I feel like you need to give your best in all that you do. Excellence is what we should always strive for, because God deserves our best. And sometimes I know I've had many people tell me my expectations of people are way too high. And so that's something, even as a middle-aged man now, I'm still working on in my own life. And so, but I enjoy it. I enjoy being, whether that's at the gym or on the ball field or on the soccer field, whatever it is, just cheering on our kids.
Oftentimes, sports can be a great outlet for kids. I know, especially kids raised in poverty, it can be. And again, my friend the other day talked about how in sports, you know, he had a rough childhood and a rough home life. He said, but in sports, he was not picked last. Oftentimes, he was picked first. And he kind of compared that to later, that his relationship with Christ. And I've got this up here on purpose. So this is supposedly Jesus going after the one lost lamb. I love that about sports, because it can be that. It can be a wonderful outlet. What would you say is the biggest misconception about those suffering from poverty?
Well, that's a good question. If we understand what poverty is, first of all, which is basically lack of experiences, relationships, connections, all of those things.
That's social capital.
That's exactly right. So that piece of it, the misconception is, you know, one of the things that I try to push against, especially as we share our story and the work and the ministry that we do, is we do not want anyone to feel pity for us. We have enough pity. And those families, they don't need pity. They need people to invest and recognize that they're made in the image of God, just like you and I are. And they have a story. We have a story. I think the one thing is that idea of I feel sorry for them, and that idea of pity really hurts the person that's thinking more about it, because a lot of times those in poverty really don't see it that way. They might from time to time, but they don't see themselves that way. And I tell you what, just knowing my family, like those who have come before me and my family who were really, really poor, realizing that they have a lot to offer. And I think sometimes there's this perception that those that live in poverty, they don't have a whole lot to offer. And really, to be honest with you, every family that we work with in our community, I learn something from them. There's something that I always learn. And my prayer is always, Lord, teach me through this experience, because it's amazing. And I love the people that we serve with. And so if we can come in with an attitude of, I'm going to give every person, no matter who it is, dignity, and understand that they are created in God's image, then we don't have these misperceptions. Because, and sure, there's no doubt that they have a lot less opportunity. I think that's evident. We can see that. But there's ways that they can step out of that or break that chain of generational poverty that we talk a lot about. And helping people understand that those that live in poverty, it is a vicious cycle. It begins with fear, goes into all the woundedness that takes place with all that, and everything's inward focused because of that. And then being able to help people understand that if we can help them see that foundational to who God has created them to be is faith, and then hope begins to spring in them, and then going from languishing, that idea of languishing, to the idea of thriving, and what that looks like, that God has a plan for their life. And so I know that's a long way to answer that question, but I think that misperception of some of those things that I shared there, that's kind of, I think, giving people dignity and understanding that I am no better than anyone else. And so I've just been blessed, and I want to come alongside, and if I can help, I want to help. But I also know that God helps me, and they help me in the process of learning through that.
That's fantastic, and I think you hit the nail on the head. Let me move on to a little bit more on, this is a new concept that's kind of hit me lately, that God's stirring in me. I've had a few developments with it, but I want to run it by you. So you have folks that are raised poor, Maybe they do suffer from extreme poverty, or maybe they're just poor based on the conversation that we're having. They get so busy trying to claw their way out of that. And they gain the understanding education can be used to help you get out of the situation that you're raised in. So they get that, check mark. Well, they get a decent career, check mark. Eventually, family, all of that. But they forget that what really matters, the relationship, I think, the relationship with Christ, that aspect of it. Mm-hmm. So I see that quite a bit. You have people that are just, they get so busy with trying to claw their way out that they forget to have that relationship, or they forget to reinvest. Mm-hmm. What would you maybe say to somebody that is in that situation? They feel like they're doing fine now. They've escaped it. What would you offer them, Dwayne?
Well, I think, first of all, you got to earn their trust, so you have the opportunity to speak into that situation. And from time to time, I've been able to do that with some of the folks that we've worked with. And most people who have come out of those situations recognize that. You don't see too many of them not giving back. But for me, in a conversation that I began to start with first, is I just ask, especially as I've built relationship and I've built capital, I've made some deposits, because every now and then that relationship bank, you make withdrawals. Yeah. Is to ask the question. So where does Jesus come in your life? Where, you're a person of faith, and begin that conversation in a very non-threatening way.
Of course.
And then, because if Christ is foundational to everything that they have, then they shouldn't be in that situation. They should be giving back, But if they're not, there's probably some wedge that has been driven there in that relationship. So helping them understand what that looks like, and speaking into that is, what are ways that you feel like you can give back, or what ways are you giving back, or maybe kind of throw the ball back in their court to begin that conversation and begin to talk about those things. I think that's the best approach, because I never want to be perceived as that person who thinks they know it all, because I don't.
No, yeah.
My granny, when I lived away from Martin County, I got to come back and be her pastor for 9 months before she passed away. She lived 98 years. And I can remember her always saying, when I would talk to her on the phone, of course she'd call me baby, she would say, "Baby, God's teaching me something new every day." And I thought, man, I've got so much to learn. So I always want to be a lifelong learner. So if I can put things back in someone else's court and learn from that process, and then hopefully they will catch that as well. I think that's part of that conversation that you have with folks. But to really remind them of how they have been blessed. But if they have broken that chain of generational poverty, there's been someone or a few someones who have helped them in that process. That just doesn't happen. That idea of pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, I don't believe in that. Even if you haven't lived in poverty, I don't believe in that. There's always people that have come alongside of you.
Would you believe I have a chapter in my book called "Where Are the Bootstraps"?
Oh, really?
Yeah,
that's great.
They don't
and I
exist.
haven't read it, so that wasn't intentional, Joe.
Yeah, that's hilarious, actually. What advice would you give to maybe teachers, parents, coaches, just general people that are working with families that are suffering from poverty?
Go beyond your job description, is what I would say. Get awesome. To know the students, the individual, the athlete, the gifted student, however, the band student, whoever it is. Get to know them beyond just what they're there to do. And that's, if you're in the classroom, you're there to test and get a good grade and go to the next grade. If you're an athlete, you're to succeed on the ball field or the ball court or whatever it is, and help the team, and all that's great. But I think for those in roles of influence and impact is not think higher of yourself than you should. So live with a posture of humility.
Amen.
But to truly and authentically get to know those students. And I can say this about a lot of the teachers that we work with, because we do a lot of work in the schools here, is I really feel like most of our teachers in our schools, really, they do that well. Many of them will know where their student is coming from. Like, they'll know what holler they live in, and they know exactly some of their situations and the difficult situation they're coming out of. I think one of the things that I think all the states in the United States can learn from Kentucky is having a resource director in every public school.
For
and
sure.
We work directly with them. And so
they changed my life.
Yeah,
as
exactly.
A youth, so.
Oh, yeah. I always tell them, and we work with them hand in hand every month, if not every week, is I tell them, you're my heroes. Because you don't get paid a whole lot, but you're the front lines and you're investing in these kids. And so I always tell, if it's a new teacher, I've actually in the past had the opportunity to recruit teachers, because we start every school year here in Martin County with quite a few uncertified teachers in the school system. And so I've gone to some of our universities and recruited teachers. And that's one thing that I encourage them to do, is to really get to know your community, and part of that is getting to know the student that's in your classroom. And I'm a firm believer, if you'll do that, as Scripture says, if you're faithful with a little, God will give you much, not as the world sees it, but as Kingdom Impact sees it. And God will open those doors if people will go beyond themselves and just what's on a piece of paper that says this is your job description.
Yeah, going that
really
extra mile.
Yes,
right?
Yep, going the extra mile. That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
What would you say is the biggest hurdle that youth in poverty, because you've been in the school systems, you work with them quite a bit, what are some of the biggest hurdles that they have to overcome?
Home situation. I mean, because they get out to the school, so many hours a week during the school year, but that hurdle of home, because home is, I think the statistic, and this is years ago when I was in youth ministry, I heard the statistic that 92% of what a student learns comes from home. And if it's generational poverty, most of our students in homes are, if they're lucky, if they have one biological parent in the home, in our communities in which we live here. And so, getting, not that those that are raising them are bad or anything like that. I don't want to be heard in that way, but I think that's their biggest hurdle, is because it's generational and it's all that those folks who are raising them know, and so they don't know any other way, and so it's not their fault, but it's all that they've ever experienced. And so I'm a firm believer that the mind once stretched never returns back to its original dimension. And so if you can give experiences, that idea of experiences, and they can see it, because our elementary school students, they have dreams, their imagination is off the charts. But what I'm finding in the work that we do is, by their middle school years, if they're living in that kind of a situation, they begin to be pushed down a little bit, can't get past a certain level, and then it's almost like they almost give up by high school and realize that, what I used to dream about, I no longer can dream about, and I'm okay if this is going to be my life. So, that part of it, I think those are the biggest hurdle. I know there's times too, and it's not intentional by those who are raising children. I don't think it's intentional whatsoever. But as a child sees themselves being elevated beyond maybe capacity-wise, where maybe a family member or parent is raising them, sometimes that individual will push them back down into that, and that's a hurdle in that, creating experiences for the folks that we work with and the students that we work with, and even parents and those that we work with that are a part, those guardians, to help them see that there are some better things that we can do to help in those situations.
My family, education was not a priority. My grandparents raised me in the heart of Martin County. We started out up Mead House, of course. I think they had a 6th and an 8th grade education, if I'm not mistaken. And so I had constant conflicts within my own home of wanting to go beyond, and not in a degrading way. Just, I wanted to be, quote unquote, normal. I wanted to get my license, get a job, graduate, go to college. And I love my grandparents, and they saved us. They kept us together, kept us out of the system. They just didn't know. They didn't know how life changing they got the gospel right.
Sure.
They introduced us to Christ early, thankfully.
Yep.
I've still got family struggling, and you want to give them a hand up, not a hand out.
Right.
And it's like they can't see it,
Well, and I go back to what I said. It's a capacity issue. And
I
don't mean that in a demeaning way.
No, of course.
It's just, there's certain experiences I've never had as a 51-year-old man that I'm ignorant about.
Sure.
And so I accept that. I understand that. And the same thing can be said sometimes in those situations, because they've just never seen it or experienced it. And if you've never experienced it, how can you expect someone to understand or get it? That's where we've got to be careful with that whole pity part. Versus understanding, and that's something I always push against, especially even in our own community, not just outside of this community, but even within the community too. You have that kind of mindset.
Because if you pity someone, you reinforce their situation.
Right.
And
Yep.
I was never interested in that, and
Right.
I'm still not. So
Right.
I can definitely respect it. Would you have a great testimonial of some of the work that you all have been doing?
Sure.
Any specific one that comes to mind for you?
Yeah, we about 4 years ago we met a family that was here in Martin County who, when we met them, and it was through connections that we have with the resource directors, because in the work that we do, rural poverty alleviation, it's all about networks and connections and all of that. And so we met a family, and when we met them, they were renting out a home. They had no electricity, no running water. Their electricity was coming from
And those places still exist.
Oh yes, absolutely, and still here. And it wasn't an isolated incident. I mean, this happens quite frequently. But this family had 100-foot electric hose running from a neighbor's house to theirs. They had a power strip that was their source of electricity, and again, no running water. And then their heat. This was in January, so their heat was a regular propane, just small heater. And then they would use the propane tanks that you have like on a grill, a gas grill.
Yep.
Every couple of days they would have to change those in and out. And the father of the home was working in a neighboring county and receiving wage in a second shift, receiving really not livable wages. Car did not work, but was paying someone to take him to work. And that's where we found this family. The great thing about the story, and the story's still being written, is we were able to love on them, have them be a part of the solution, and how do we fix some of this stuff, and having teams come in. We were able to eventually relocate them to a better place to live as a family. Although we did get them electricity, got their water back on, and all of that. Because having a safe place to live is half the battle when you're dealing with poverty. And so coming back to a safe place. And so relocated them. This family also wanted to give back, and because of our thrift store, we have a trailer of supplies and semi-trailers and trailers of supplies that come into our store. They came to unload a semi-trailer, and it was there at that experience that the father gave his heart to Jesus through our pastor being there and leading him to Jesus.
Yeah, praise God.
His kids were there. They got to witness that. They've been connected into a local church here. I know the oldest daughter just got baptized a few weeks ago, and we're working with her right now. She's a senior in high school, very sharp, working with the resource director to get her in a Christian university, and we're working toward that right now. But if that can happen, and it's a lot of work, it breaks that chain. And this individual too, we're thinking about possibly in a very part-time role right now, hiring them for some of the work that we're doing as well, the father. And so I love this family dearly. They're some of my dearest friends. And just being a part of that story. And there's story after story after story of what God has been doing and seeing that take place. But here's the thing. I tell this all the time when I go and speak or talk or preach, wherever I'm at, and I say, I come in for half hour, 45 minutes to an hour and speak, and this all sounds great, and you're excited and you want to go do it, but it's not a sprint. It's a marathon, and it takes time. And so it's the longevity of it is so vitally important. And so it's really, really, really important to understand that it's not a microwave experience. And so the call that God called us to here, that's what gives us the staying power, even when it gets very, very difficult. Because there's stories that we've worked on too that are not successful.
Sure.
And that can be really debilitating and discouraging. And you're like, there's times, and Satan will fight. He usually fights me when teams are gone and I'm not traveling and all that. And in the middle of it, and a family I've worked with and the ministries worked with and people have invested in have reverted back to where they were. And Satan will say, see, you're not making a difference.
Yeah.
And that's very, very difficult. But I'm a firm believer of our calling and what Scripture says, that greater is He that is in us than he that is in the world. And so we got to live into that. And I do that sometimes a lot more than other times, because it can be pretty discouraging at times.
Yeah, it's kind of like the gospel. It's risky.
It's messy.
Yeah. Jesus dying for our sins, knowing many would not accept it. But going back to that, you got to do it for the one, right?
Yep.
And
well, we used to, in youth ministry, it's interesting you have that picture behind you on the wall. And when I was doing youth ministry in southern Indiana, we had what we called 991 ministry. And it was all about the one. And so we had T-shirts, we had a logo and all of that. And so the question was on our shirts, ask me about the one. And so being able to talk about the one is so vitally important. And I'm so thankful, because at one time we were the one.
That's right. That's right.
And so we were in that. Now we're in the 99, and we got to
Yeah.
understand that piece of it too. And so, but yeah, that's exactly right. It's about the one.
So I'm 17. I'm a homeless youth at the time. I was bouncing around anywhere that would take me. I end up living with a cousin takes me in. Guess where? 3 houses down from your church. So Turkey Creek will always play a special place in my heart.
That's neat.
I was there for about a year and a half while I was doing my senior year of high school.
Oh, wow.
So
Wow, that's great.
it was there that when I was loved and someone walked along long term with me and my poverty, exposed me to having a job, to getting my license, to applying to colleges. My goodness, that
Yeah.
it changed everything.
Yeah.
I wish more people, and I say all that for this because I know you're doing it. You're going long term. You're going deep with families. If we could get more people, more ministries thinking long term, going that extra mile, that's where the impact happens. So I think of that like little image that's on social media all the time of the guy with the pickaxe, and he's digging and he's digging, and it shows he turns around just inches before he hits the diamonds.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people take that approach to ministry.
One of the things that I say is don't give up on the brink of a miracle. There's power in prayer. So prayer is foundational to all we do because of the scripture that says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and turn from their wicked ways, he says that he will hear from heaven and heal our land, save us and heal our land. And so that's vitally important. And, there was a book that I read, you talk about the quick hitter, the 1 week kind of experience and all that, get the spiritual check mark, that kind of deal on a short-term mission team. One of the
When
things
helping hurts.
Yeah, when helping hurts is part of that. But there's another one called toxic charity.
Oh,
which
yeah,
is
yeah.
Which is really good too.
So I was at a poverty conference in Tennessee this weekend, and they talked about it.
It's a good way to remember that it's for the long haul. It's not, and it really should be a way of life because, if we really study Jesus' ministry when he was here for 33 years on earth, he worked with those in the margins.
Yeah.
And that's
right.
All of his ministry, that's where he spent his time. And that was bringing the new kingdom here to earth.
Yeah.
Here on earth as it is in heaven. And so, it's just trying to live out of that every day. Our hope is when teams come in here to serve, one of the things that we'll tell them is we have a lot of, we're scheduling 2 years out now with mission teams that come in and all of that because they're returning.
Yeah.
But when we get new teams, one of the things that I tell them is, I don't want, and sometimes I'll turn teams away because if I feel like they're just coming to get their one-hit week wonder and that's it, and we'll never hear from them again, we don't want to do that because we think it hurts our ministry, it hurts our witness, all of that, and it really hurts them in the long run as well. But if they can come in and see what we're doing, and at the end of the week, we always do a session that's entitled, So Now What? You've been here for a week, you've experienced God, you see what we're doing in community building and all of that. What does that look like? And when people say things like, I now know what it looks like to engage my community, and this idea of it can happen in Martin County, it can happen anywhere, is what we hope that they catch hold of. And when those things begin to happen and people are going back to change their community because of what they've experienced here, then we know what we've done, what God has called us to do. So that's not toxic charity. The opposite of that is, where we're giving, but that's it. What are we doing? We're really giving a handout instead of a hand up. There's a great book out there. It's an easy read called, it's about men are like waffles. Men like to compartmentalize everything. And we can't do that. We can't compartmentalize because God has created us holistically. And so my spiritual life does impact my social life, my relational life, my financial life. That's all interconnected with that. We can't get stuck here. We've got to continue to move on and help these families.
Have you read Loving Your Community?
I've heard of it.
It's a newer one.
Okay.
Oh my gosh. So it talks about the aspect of a church or a campus or church facilities, how they're empty 90% of the time.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
My gosh.
Yeah, that was a
it'll
hard thing I was
challenge you.
having pastoring at Turkey Creek there the last year. 168 hours in a week, and we were using it maybe 8 hours a week. And I'm just like, man, what we invest in it for upkeep and all that, because we don't own it.
No,
we steward it. That's God's, and that's true about my own life. This house, my name is on the mortgage, but it's God's. I don't own it. He's blessed me with it, so I have to steward it.
Yeah,
and that's the thing we try to protect.
Well,
and when we do that,
and we have a habit. We've developed a habit as a church, I think, of saying no unless we have to say yes. But it should be the opposite.
should always be yes.
Say yes unless you have to say no.
There's a place and time to say that, for sure.
Dwayne, you all are doing such great work, not in just our hometown of Martin County, of course, but Appalachia as a whole. I mean, it's in your name, for Pete's sake. Yeah. If others want to join in, how could they help?
Yeah. Well, there's a number of different ways. Our website is AppalachiaReachout.com. You can go in there and learn more about us. We just upgraded the website. It's more interactive and everything. There's ways you can give financially, of course. That's really, really important part. But the most important piece is praying for us. And there's, I think on there, on the website, it's listed ways that you can pray for us. If you want to volunteer, like I said, we bring in short-term mission teams. So if someone's listening to this that's states away or hours away, they can come, they can get to one of our sites and serve in a short-term mission trip. Also, if they're local, if folks are watching this local, there's always ways you can volunteer, whether that's in our thrift store or our food pantry, or if you want to come alongside teams when they're working here that are out of state and work a day with them, always willing to allow that to happen for sure. And so there's just a variety of ways. And if you're feeling like, hey, I want to get involved in this some way, but I'm not sure what that looks like, feel free to give us a call. We'd love to talk to you, and through that process, maybe figure out kind of where you feel like you'd be best suited to serve in the ministry. I always tell people, you don't have to be skilled to help us. If you come with a willing heart, there's places to serve. We also do a lot of tutoring in our schools. There's just a variety of things that can be done. So if you feel like God's laying on your heart after listening to this, and want to do that, pray about it, reach out to us, and we'll find a place. As long as you have a willing heart, there's a place to serve.
I'll be sure to include your contact information, the website, all in the description for our audience today. Dwayne, I want to end this with a bit of a humorous story for you. I don't know if you know this. I may have already told you. I don't know. I've just graduated high school. I've been accepted into Alice Lloyd College. Few other schools, but that's where I end up going. There, you have to dress professionally at least one day a week, oftentimes more than that. So what does that mean? That means dead of summer, you're wearing a suit and tie to class. You got to walk all of campus in it. I didn't know how to tie a tie. I didn't know what was considered a suit. Slacks, dress socks, dress shoes. I was clueless. Guess where I go to get my suits for college?
Appalachia Reach Out Thrift Store.
Yes, sir.
Great. Appreciate your business.
Buddy, you were setting me up for success and you didn't even know
That's
it.
Great. I'll have to tell Bill and Jana Zeidema, who oversee our thrift store, that story. They'll love that.
The work that you all do, it matters. And please don't forget that.
Yeah, appreciate that. It means a lot. Thank you.
For anyone listening, if you enjoyed this conversation today and you want to hear more, you want to hear about other people doing great work, make sure you like this video, comment, subscribe, and remember, keep sharing stories. See you in the next episode.